Mafia, the city of lost heaven. Or is it just Mafia? I'm not sure. I've seen that subtitle in a few places, like the fan wiki, but it's not on the game's cover. Regardless, Mafia is a third-person shooter slash driving slash sandbox game. I guess in modern terms it could be described as a Grand Theft Auto Light, because it's closest to that franchise while doing its own thing. But I'll come back to that later. It was developed by Illusion Softworks, which is now known as Hangar 13, and released in August of 2002. The game was written and directed by a certain Daniel Vavre, which you may have heard of in recent times, as he also directed Kingdom Come Deliverance. You play as Thomas Angelo, a taxi driver turned mafioso after a fateful encounter. One night, as Tommy is taking a break, he's forced by two mob members to help them escape from unknown assailants. After doing so, he learns that these two men are part of the Salieri family, who is grateful for his help and offer a position in their ranks. Since the assailants know his taxi's plate number, he figures joining the Salieris is his best chance of staying alive. The game begins with a flash forward, where Tommy makes a deal with the detective, promising to give him information about Salieri in exchange for the protection of his family because Salieri wants him dead for yet unknown reasons. And so, the game is a recollection of some of Tommy's jobs from 1930 to 1938. I have to say, the game doesn't start by making a good impression. The first bit of gameplay is that taxi escape, and at this point the only thing the player is likely to know about the game is the linear tutorial. In other words, you're not supposed to have any idea what the layout of Lost Heaven is like, which makes escaping a lot more complicated. There is no minimap, just a radar that tells you where other cars are. You can invoke a map of the city, but only during gameplay, and reading a map for the first time while you're trying to go as fast as possible and getting shot at is pretty complicated. Speaking of getting shot at, the taxi is expectedly flimsy and you're likely to have a popped tire early into the chase, making the escape even more frustrating. The first time I played through the mission, I managed to escape after a while, but I spent so long driving around that my fuel tank depleted and I got a game over. Yeah, seriously. The majority of the second mission has you playing taxi for a handful of courses across the city. I find it really puzzling that the first two missions are not inverted, because this one gives the player a good feeling for what the city is like. Not to mention it's set during the day, which helps with memorization. My theory is that the developers wanted to give a more bombastic first impression and one might be slightly boring taxiing. In my opinion though, since the player isn't supposed to know anything about the city, that taxi segment is a completely fresh discovery, which means it wouldn't be boring at all for a new player. From there on, nearly every mission follows the same structure. An introduction cutscene in the Salieri bar explains what the mission is about, then you get equipment and choose a car from behind the bar, then the mission proceeds, and finally you drive back to the bar. The player starts with minute tasks, like beating up punks and wrecking cars, but as Tommy climbs through the ranks, he's assigned increasingly intense missions, like assassinations or bombings. I assume most people get into this game expecting an experience similar to GTA, and while a lot of parallels can be drawn, Mafia has a fundamentally different approach to the gangster sandbox genre, in the sense that it is a far more grounded game, both in its narration and its gameplay. First thing to note is that this is not a truly open world game, at least in the main story. There is no free roaming in between missions, you directly continue to the next one, and during missions you can drive around the city freely, but there won't be anything to do. The city serves more as a static background for the missions than a genuine open world. You're going to spend a good chunk of your time driving around in Mafia. Being set in the 30s, the cars are all heavily inspired from that era, and that includes their driving characteristics. By that I mean that the vast majority of cars don't accelerate well, or turn well, or brake well. If you're used to the way cars in GTA 5 handle, you can throw that knowledge out the window. You need to take it easy there. The game does have a bunch of sports cars and racing cars that handle much more nicely, and as the in-game years progress, the cars on the street become more modern and powerful. Also, at the end of certain missions, the game lets the player visit an auto mechanic who will give you small, extra missions which are rewarded by powerful cars that you can use in later main missions. Beyond the handling, the game lets you switch to manual transmission and even has a functional clutch. This is really nice if you're looking for a more authentic driving experience. As I mentioned earlier, the cars also have a functional fuel tank which you can refuel at gas stations. To be honest, I've never had to use this feature, as the car you choose at the beginning of missions has a full tank, which is way beyond what you'll need. The damage model is also fairly convincing. You can lose tires, deform your car, and sustain damage that will actively worsen the car's performance, or damage its direction. All in all, you're better off driving safely. Because if you don't, the boys in blue will come for you. The game implements some traffic rules like a speed limit and red lights. If the police sees you break those rules, it will give chase. The police has 3 stages in this game. For minor offenses like running a red light, you get a fine. The game has no money system, so this effectively just means pulling over and watching a small cinematic. For bigger offenses, the police will try to arrest you, which is a game over. At that point, you need to either run away or kill the officers. And finally, there's the good old shoot on sight. Unlike GTA, wanted level isn't immediately universal, meaning that if you escape or kill whoever is chasing you, the wanted level just disappears. If you take too long to get away though, you will have a global wanted level, which you can only get rid of by hiding for a certain time. If you got a wanted level in a car, you can become incognito by leaving your car while no one is watching, and vice versa. Being globally wanted also only means officers will chase you on sight, not that the game will continuously spawn police next to you, so you really can pick a small alley and wait there. I assume the main reason police will give you trouble in this game is because you've broken the speed limit, which is 40 miles per hour. It's a dilemma you'll always be facing. You want to get your destination faster, but at the same time there's a risk you'll end up in a police chase that's going to cost you more time than just following the speed limit. What I ended up doing is ignore the speed limit and always keep an eye on the radar, so that as soon as a police car is on sight, I brake hard. That way, at worst, I just get stopped for a minute to get a fine. Police cars are really competent at giving chase, so in my experience, it's a lot more bothersome to try to escape. So what do you do when you're not driving around? Well, you're most likely going to be either beating up people or shooting them. The earlier missions have a lot of the former. Remember what I said about bad impressions? Unfortunately, that kind of extends to whenever the game asks you to get into melee fights. Here you can either use your fists or a melee weapon like a bat or knuckle dusters. All of these let you charge your hits for more damage. You have only one move here and it's a standard hit. No blocking, no dodging, no parrying. Just left clicking. When you hit someone or get hit, the victim staggers. This has the nasty effect of putting you in a stun lock whenever the game asks you to fight more than one person at once, which is frustrating. So how do you avoid that? By sort of kiting the enemy. The best solution I found is to charge a hit and either run in circles around the enemy to hit their back over and over, or run away and hit them at the edge of the melee range. Either way, it's very unglamorous and awkward. Thankfully, the game pretty much ditches melee combat entirely after a few missions and will instead put you in gunfights, which are magnitudes more fun to get through. The game lets you use a selection of guns from the era, ranging from revolvers to 1911s to Thompsons and Springfields. You'll be given a gun or two at the beginning of each mission, and you can pick up those of dead enemies. The game has sort of an inventory system with a handful of slots for smaller weapons like pistols and knives, and one slot for larger weapons like shotguns. This means you can at most have one large weapon in your inventory and one in your hands, and you might have to drop that one as well, as the police will arrest you if they see you walking around with a gun. All firearms have a realistic bullet speed, which makes them essentially a hit scan for 99% of shootouts. Aiming is based on a reticule and bullets are always completely accurate to it. That means you can line up precision shots with enough skill. By extent, that also means you can sometimes cheese the AI by shooting them from a very long distance where they're not programmed to retaliate. When reloading a weapon, the entire magazine is discarded, so you may have to give up on your compulsive reloading habits. Strangely, the game has grenades and molotovs, but it only lets you use them once and optionally near the beginning of the game. Those would have been a nice addition to combat, but they are unfortunately not exploited. Gunfights require a decent amount of care. Like melee weapons, getting shot can cause you to stagger, and it's very easy to die by exposing yourself to bullets. The best way to approach shootouts is to crouch, move slowly around corners, and shoot first. making things definitely slower paced and more tactical than GTA. On that note, I would have liked the ability to lean around corners, but I understand this might feel a little too tactical for the scope of the game. You can also side roll by pressing a move button twice, but I personally find it more annoying than anything since I would often end up accidentally rolling out of a corner while trying to move slowly. Thankfully that move can be disabled, so it isn't much of an issue. At any rate, gunfights are very satisfying to play through. All guns have a very chunky sound and enemies contort and fall in the pool of their own blood, adding to the feeling of power guns have. Sometimes enemies you kill won't be completely dead and will be crawling on the floor, adding to the feeling of immersion. Speaking of the AI, well, it's serviceable in this game. They're not annoyingly accurate, but they can be devastating if you're not careful. They can definitely be improved though, especially when it comes to self-preservation. They won't go to cover when shot from far away, and it's very easy to stun lock them. It's pretty easy to figure out the AI's blind spots and exploit them, removing a lot of the challenge. For example, there's multiple times in the game where you need to escape a car. Even though the AI is good at giving chase, the easiest strategy is just to pull over, get out, and shoot the enemies as they get off their car. Still, on your first time through, you're likely to struggle in a few parts. The game uses a health point system that you can only replenish at scarcely located medkits, and progression is based on a checkpoint save system. That means if you reach a checkpoint with 5 HP, well, you'll have to retry like that or load an earlier save. Another more frustrating source of difficulty is the tendency scripts have to break during a few missions. For example, there's one segment where you need to do a specific sequence of things to move boxes onto a truck, and you need to distract the person guarding them. But sometimes that person won't talk to you or will start shooting at you for getting close, which isn't supposed to happen. Thankfully, this type of issue is fairly rare, so it's not that big of a deal. When it comes to the visual side of things, I think the game holds up very well. The textures and polygon counts are still detailed enough to not feel muddy. The city is vibrant, with a decent amount of cars and pedestrians on screen, and the various districts have a distinct look to them, ranging from low-income works quarters to downtown skyscrapers to millionaire villas. As for the audio, it's also serviceable overall. Like I mentioned earlier, guns make a satisfying bang, but the rest of the sound effects just do their job. The game has no radio, it just plays a handful of tracks from the era. One or two are standout, but I think the soundtrack is forgettable otherwise. I'd say the best part of the audio is the voice acting. It feels really convincing, and aside from a handful of lines that are oddly acted, it does a good job conveying emotions and tone.
Sure, boss, he's a natural. Before they could say cannolis, they were wheelers. And before they could recover, we were gone. Morello was probably pretty pissed right now.
Really? I'm glad to hear it.
He's one tough customer.
In that case, welcome to the family, Tommy. You've passed the first test.
It's an honor, sir.
And now we've got a new member.
And that's an especially good thing because the narration carries the game as much as the gameplay does. I'll start off by saying that I'm someone who rarely consumes media about the Italian Mafia in the States, so I'm inexperienced when it comes to that type of stories. With that said, I found what's there to be engaging. As I mentioned in the beginning, the entire game is the main character reminiscing his career. Every few missions, the story pulls the player back to present time where Tommy and the detective talk. The detective makes comments on the jobs you took on, lambasting the immorality of it all, and Tommy refutes his accusations with his mindset, the things he learned, and the way the world turns in a more general sense. I found these exchanges to be fascinating because it gives a morally grayer tone to the things you do. There's a handful of recurring characters in the entire game, each with their distinct personality and motivations. They really feel like care was put into them. Most of them don't come off as one-dimensional. There's a real sense of character progression, but I wish some of them got a bit more screen time. The game also does a nice job at conveying the feeling that you're going through nearly a decade, with the evolution of the missions that are given to you and the changing cars that you see on the road. One last thing I appreciate about the story is how nicely it ties with the sequel, and you'll recognize it easily if you've played it. Mafia should take somewhere between 12 to 16 hours to complete your first time through, and I think it's very well paced, save for a few segments. Beyond the main story, there's a few extra things to do. The freeride mode does exactly what it says. You pick a car and a time of day and you're free to do whatever you want in the city. This mode has a money system that lets you buy health, car repairs, and guns. You can earn money by driving fast, playing taxi, or killing gangsters. I didn't spend much time there because there really isn't anything special to do. Another game mode is Freeride Extreme, which is unlocked once you beat the main story. This one is similar to Freeride, but there's around 2 dozen small missions scattered across the city. They're all very arcadey in nature, like chasing a guy named Speedy Gonzales in his underwear who runs at 100 miles an hour, or going to a beach to save a woman in skimpy clothing before a sea monster eats her. These missions let you unlock special cars that you can use in this mode or regular Freeride. I think that mode serves as a nice distraction. If you play on the console version, Freeride Extreme is replaced by a Grand Prix mode which lets you race cars. The last bit of additional content is Car Cyclopedia, where you can look at 3D models of unlocked cars and see their statistics. And that's about it for what the game has to offer. With all of that said, do I recommend Mafia? Most definitely. It's very enjoyable to get through, save for a handful of unpolished segments. But you should keep in mind that this game came out less than a year after GTA 3, and as such, it requires a bit more patience than a modern GTA-like. There's a really good time to be had here, and the game can be bought for very cheap at every major online retailer. Mafia also came out on PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2004, and while I haven't tried it there myself, as far as I can tell from reviews, you should stay away from those versions. It looks worse, it runs worse, and it controls worse. If I've convinced you to give Mafia a shot, I'll conclude by touching on running the game on a modern operating system. As far as playing through the game goes, there should be no issue, but there's some aspects that can be easily improved with great effect. By default, the game accepts widescreen resolutions, but the HUD will be stretched from 4:3 and vertical parts of the game are cut off. Also, the game is capped at just over 60 FPS natively, which is a bummer if you own a high refresh rate monitor like me. Thankfully, these two shortcomings and every other one I haven't mentioned are simple to fix. I strongly recommend you read through the PC Gaming Wiki page for the game to get instructions on how to run it as well as possible. I hope you'll have as much fun as I did. Thank you for watching.